Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. The year is almost over, which means everyone's creating their top 10 and best of lists. I don't know what my top 10 list is quite yet, but I do know that the top of my best of list is our listeners. Thank you. Makes these Monday mornings very worthwhile. But we still need candidates for this year's Appsec Top 10, which means this week we chat with Aviv Grafi about building systems to securely handle potentially malicious files and the design considerations for prioritizing user experience in a security product. In the news segment, malware signed by leaked Android platform certs, cars controlled by hacked web APIs, bug bounty research described by a researcher, and more. Count to 10 and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Passbolt is a free and open source password manager that allows your team to store, organize, and share passwords securely. Passbolt is privacy first and highly versatile. It can be installed on-prem behind your firewall, used in a secure cloud, or deployed as a cloud-native application. You can check out the source code on GitHub, extend it with the REST API, integrate it with the CLI or SDKs, and even contribute. Get started with Passbolt for free now. Check it out at securityweekly.com/Passbolt. UFOs are everywhere. That's right. UFOs, unidentified file objects, are hiding in files in your cloud apps and storage. UFOs can contain malware that exfiltrates data or deploys ransomware. 70% of UFOs in files can't be detected or prevented by traditional scanning solutions like antivirus and sandboxing. That's where Vatiro comes in. Vatiro prevents UFOs before they hitch a ride in on files in the cloud, without detection and without slowing down business. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Vatiro. That's VOTIRO. This is episode 222, recorded December 5th, 2022. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and of course I have two co-hosts with me, one of whom is Mr. John Kinsella. Hello, John.
I feel like I should have some sort of snappy comeback on that 222 thing, but all I can say right now is good morning.
Good morning. Well, you could say, we'll see. Are you too legit to talk to Paul Asadorian, or should we quit right now? No. Hello, Paul.
Hey, how's it going, Mike and John? Thanks for having me today.
Glad to have you on as a co-host for us today. One quick announcement, and then we have someone else to round out our trio of twos. I'm not sure how the math works there, but first, do please follow us on Twitter for live stream reminders, highlighted clips, memes, and more. You can find us at Sec Weekly. Aviv Grafi is founder and CTO of Vatiro, which helps organizations accept safe content and inbound data. Prior to co-founding Vatiro, Aviv served in an elite intelligence unit of the IDF, nurturing his passion for finding simple solutions to complex security issues. His areas of expertise span the cyber product lifecycle from strategy and development through go-to-market, along with network security, defensive programming, penetration testing, vulnerability research, and virtualization. Aviv speaks publicly on these topics as they are relevant in order to raise industry awareness and push for innovative solutions. Hello, Aviv. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Mike. Good morning, everyone.
So we're glad you speak about these issues generally, and of course, we're glad to have you speak about them here. And I'll say a little bit jokingly, you sent over a PDF of some, your bio for me to read, some ideas. And I'm like, I've received a PDF in the email in my email. I've been told by numerous, perhaps not great cybersecurity awareness programs to never click and never open such things. How can we make this different? This seems like a terrible story to be telling our users.
Yeah, actually, you got it right. I mean, one of the problems is that, I'm sending you a PDF and you're getting PDFs from all over, from audience and clients and partners. And there is that tension between productivity and security. That problem that hackers are leveraging even 20 or 30 years after they actually started to post those malicious files on the internet.
Indeed. And I think, obviously I'm joking a bit because I think quite the opposite is true, that people just need to be opening files. But before we get to that part, let's talk about the malicious side of things, because you have quite a background in playing with this and understanding what does a malicious file mean or even can look like. So tell us a little bit about that creativity you in your applied research on playing with these files that are potentially malicious.
Yeah, actually, that was right after I finished my Army service. I was working for a couple of startups, and I was specifically interested in how to hack into organizations as part of my work as a security researcher. In fact, I was doing penetration testing for organizations, and one of the things I discovered that we all consume files, and also the recruiting companies and recruiting departments in the companies that I was auditing their security systems. And I found that they all have one thing in common: they need to do their job, right? They need to, for example, screen hundreds of resumes a week, or they need to open invoices in the finance and accounting department. They all consume documents. And in fact, documents are one of the things that still, we all use and still have vulnerabilities in it. And in fact, that's the easiest and cheapest way for not even bad guys, even penetration testers and auditors, just, to test the system security.
Yeah, the easiest backdoors are valid credentials, if you can phish them, social engineering. And then the second one perhaps is download and execute a file. But I really wanted to set this up too with the tone that what's wrong with downloading and executing files or opening an Excel sheet or opening a PDF, because people need to do work, right? So from a security product perspective then, there's a couple ways we might approach this. And I'm really curious to learn what your thinking was in designing and approaching how to build something that's also usable, friendly towards the end user.
Yeah, so if we would look at the history of how we tackled that problem, years ago we had those antiviruses. That was the traditional security solution for detecting malicious documents and malicious content. And, after that, we say, we have a problem with AVs. They're based on signatures. So maybe we should collaborate and have kind of, it was the internet or collaborative signature AV. Okay, we had that. Every 15 minutes, we had new signatures, and everyone was pushing the signatures to the cloud. But still, that wasn't enough. Then we had a brilliant idea. We said, we're going to detonate those files in the customer premise, right? We called it sandbox, right? That was about, let's say, 10 or a bit more than that, 10 years ago. And, we said, look, that was a nice idea, but it wasn't scalable. And in fact, a lot of the malicious documents were just, they were just bypassing those sandboxes solutions. Say, okay, so let's have a next-gen AV or EDR, which based on AI, on machine learning. But the machine learning model is as good as the sample set that you fit it in with the data. So in fact, all those techniques or solutions, they rely on one thing. We need to know what is malicious in order to find the next one. We need to look back at the history, and we hope that we can predict the future. Now, I'm not in the prediction business, so I cannot really predict the future. But I realized that I know one thing. I know that the HR guy or lady, they want to consume the content of that resume I sent them. They want to have the name, the job experience. They want to have the contact details. They want to have everything on top of that PDF. So if they're interested in that layer that is relevant to the user experience and not in the bits where the vulnerability resides, why not taking that content and replicate it into a safe version of that document, delivering that immediately to those end users? And in fact, that was the solution by turning the problem on its head. We're not looking for bad stuff. We're not trying to guess whether a document or content is malicious. We know what are the good parts, what is the positive parts, and then we're delivering that immediately. And that's kind of the idea, or that's what the thought process behind what is called today content disarm and reconstruction.
Yeah, so that's interesting because you mentioned, gave us a good quick history of antivirus, for example, the idea of signatures, ML, smart learning with regular expressions and complex if statements, or and sandboxing. But then rewriting these files sounds interesting, because I imagine that means you can rewrite to the subset of functionality that you are familiar with, or at least seems more secure than others. And here I'm thinking of, for example, the surprise perhaps to some people that PDF files can contain JavaScript, executable JavaScript, which is pretty wild. So as you approach this, and even are like not looking at necessarily directly at sandboxing, you're still doing some, you're doing some software engineering on your own. You're parsing these files, which is very often a trap, an area where memory safety issues come up. So what are some of the architecture choices, or some of the ways that you've handled this so that your own systems are secure before you even deliver them to the end user?
So first, you got it right. I mean, as a security architect, you probably understand that if we're parsing those documents and that content, we might be in the same problem as the end users when this might blow up in Votiro's processing data center. So what we did in order to protect ourselves from having that bomb detonating in our own backyard is actually every process is being done in a containerized environment. So every document, every piece of content is being rendered in a read-only least privilege environment. So it's actually volatile. So if something goes wrong, okay, that's it. We're just throwing that process and nothing, nothing get done. But this was designed with the security in mind, as opposed to the endpoint, where if something blows up in the endpoint, that's it. Practically, 99% chance that you're done.
No, and I think I'd love to hear more about some of the ideas and some of the benefits here of why the rewrite makes sense. Because one of if you have sandboxing, there's the classic cases of just let something run for a minute just to make sure it's not malicious, while the malware inside has a sleep timer that's going to wait for 2 minutes and then it's going to trigger. Or even something there's a cat and mouse game here, as we see, for example, cats jumping over my keyboard right now. But so tell us a little bit more about the trade-offs you're making here and the thinking behind rewriting these files and inoculating them, to use one word.
Yeah. So first, you got it right regarding the bypass and evasion techniques for sandboxes. So you mentioned the timer one, but obviously there are more techniques. There are some advanced sandboxes in the market that can actually, accelerate the time and overcome that simple timing evasion. But those bad guys, they did pretty smart guys, like checking the hardware or even the recent documents of the Word application that is installed on the VM. If you think about that, if that's a virtual machine, the recent document would probably be empty as opposed to a working machine. So there's really cool techniques that those bad guys are doing in order to evade detection technologies. Now, regarding in CDR and content disarm and reconstruction, the technology that we invented, the trade-offs are mostly that we need to be the masters of file formats. So we're doing that for PDFs, we talked about that, but we're doing that for Excel spreadsheets, for Word documents, for PowerPoints, for zip files, for RTF documents, for images, practically for almost any file format that is being used in business today, even planning files like CAD, AutoCAD files. We're doing that as well. So obviously we need to master those file formats, and we have those experts, but obviously we don't support 1%, but we support close to 1% of every business file type in use today.
I'm curious then too about then just testing this system. So there's one thing to say we're going to rewrite into the known safe version of these files, the subset of functionality. But I think, as all of us on here know, security isn't absolute. It's a matter of degrees. What's known safe today has a DEF CON presentation, a Black Hat presentation, and suddenly becomes a little bit messier than we expected. So what is some of the testing that you put in for, whether it's that creative thinking, like looking at recent documents, which I love that example, or even just, your background, how to create malicious files that your system doesn't quite know about or can learn from quickly?
Yeah. So I think the key here is to understand what is really relevant for the user experience, and it's kind of flat. It does not have any complexity behind it. For example, if we talk about text, let's say you need to upload a document to insurance company client portal. You want to file a claim to your health provider, right? So you're taking one of the doctor reports and you're uploading that as PDFs. Now, on the other side, on the claim processing department, is someone that need to take a look at the text. It doesn't really, interested if you have a 3D object underneath that text, right? So as long as and we did our research by processing more than 10 billion documents on the last few years, we understood what is really relevant for the user experience and what is likely irrelevant for user experience. For example, 3D objects in PDFs, right? It's unlikely that an insurance company or even a bank that receive documents from partners would be, likely to get those objects.
So, Aviv, I have a question. So your technology doesn't necessarily scan these documents, but provides a way for the user to access them without a whole bunch of points in the application and or document that could be exploited and or vulnerable.
Right.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's similar to other technologies in the past that we've seen that do that kind of thing that I really like, because you essentially have wiped out a whole giant swath of attack surface by doing that.
That's right. And I think the challenge here was to really understand how the file format should look like and what the user are expecting. And in fact, while we're doing that process, we're getting better and better exponentially as we're seeing more documents and seeing more edge cases. So we're able to really polish that technology to a degree where, in fact, the users, they're getting the exact same file format, file type. So they don't even know that we are there.
I want to lean into that a little bit too, because I like that aspect that you've repeated very much, I think 3 times, if I'm counting right, user experience, which, to be clear, I think is a positive comment. It sounds like, I haven't heard yet users are the enemy, stupid users, that we would be safe if it weren't for the users. I could go on with a lot of very honestly bad Appsec tropes here. So what did it take? How did you switch that thinking? Was it a challenge to switch the thinking with your product team, marketing team, engineering teams, just to say, we're going to deliver in this way and actually have that emphasis on the user experience?
Yeah, so one of the things that we understood that a lot of our customers, they came to us and say, we're having those annual or biannual, phishing awareness campaigns. And users are still opening those attachments, and they were just pulling their ear off, and they cannot really demonstrate how they can really the users would be improving and in that detection rate of. And the problem is that we were trying to move the responsibility, because we failed with the previous technology, that we're trying to move the responsibility to the poor end users, and we asked them, you would spot the phishing, not us. And obviously that created a lot of tension. So you might say, this stupid user opened that document. But to be honest, if someone would send me from our internal finance, say, there was a problem wiring your paycheck, and please fill in the attached form, I would fill the attached form, right? Because I would open the document. I want to have my paycheck. So I think that was the problem. And when there is a problem, we tend to blame people. That was because of his fault. And I think that was a point where we understood, okay, so we're taking the human factor out of that equation. We're not, telling the users you would now spot the phishing. We're telling them, actually, open any document you receive from now. I mean, whether it's coming from Box, whether it's shared via Slack channel, whether it's sent via email or downloaded from the web, we understood that we want to be the system or the core process in the business that actually allows the users to work. And I think that's what actually guides us every day as the productivity, and we want to enable the business to work.
Aviv, how do you handle the situation where a user has to interact with the document? I think specifically I'm thinking about, especially if you're a consultant and you have a business, you need to fill out forms. And fax machines are a thing of the past unless you work in healthcare. And so I have to interact with that document. Does your platform handle that?
Yeah, so actually, I think we're one of the only solutions in our space that we're not flattening the forms. In fact, we know how to read those PDF formats and enable those editable fields, because we understood pretty quickly that someone need to fill his W-9 form, and someone just flatted that form is okay, that's useless. I'm not going to print it, right? So we understood that this is the most important thing, the user experience and understanding how the file format should look like. And if you think about some more advanced kind of use cases like finance departments that deals with macros. Macros, believe it or not, still being in use by a lot of small and large enterprises. Years. I mean, those files probably maybe they're going to stay after us. I don't know, but they're still using those Excel spreadsheets with macros, and we actually developed a technology to understand how a benign macro should look like. This is one of the last pieces in the Office suite that we had to develop in order to regenerate those saved documents.
I like this because, basically what you're saying, Aviv, is they've jammed too many features into all of these document formats. We don't need 80% of them, roughly, right? And we can get away without it, which reduces your attack surface, which I like.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that the other catalyst for that is that we're getting more documents than before. If you think about, even the COVID, a lot of employees working from home, a lot of companies, they went digital, and they digitalize all their processes, or a lot of their processes. So now they're receiving, digital documents as opposed to hand printed hand copies. And on top of that, they were just interacting with some other system via API. So they were asking, okay, so we understand that you can attach to, let's say, email or Slack. Okay, how we do that for our business application? And we are API-centric solutions. So we're offering, if there is a channel or there is a source that we do not support today, you can just, take Viter's API, integrate that with this solution. So, in fact, any document, no matter where it comes from, even from machine-to-machine processes, which sometimes there are the sensitive spots in some organizations because there's no one to really scan and detect those files today.
Yeah, I think there's a RFC 3514, the evil bit. If we could just implement that, our lives would be easier. But and our lives would also be, well, where was I going with this? I think, you mentioned too, Excel spreadsheets, they're here, they're everywhere. And there's a rough joke, right? If your startup can't improve on a spreadsheet, then, probably your startup isn't going to survive. So, but I'm curious, we have, you mentioned a bunch of different files, and I think we're all predicating this on email, but people interact with files in a lot of different ways than email. So what are, how are you looking at that? How are you making sure that that both the delivery mechanism as well as what is being delivered can be done securely in a way that is still, friendly to the user experience here?
Yeah. So, for example, one of the things that we see is that a lot of documents, as I mentioned, are moving from email to upload portals. So companies are interacting now via applications. A lot of them are actually being hosted on AWS or Azure or some other cloud infrastructure, and they're not even in the local repositories. If you think about 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of companies used to have their file server right on their lab, and that was hosting a lot of the documents, and now that might be on S3 bucket. Now, who is really securing those S3 buckets out there? It's not that you have your AV like 15 years ago on your file server. So we understood that we need to protect those kind of repositories as well. So it might be S3 buckets, it might be Azure file blobs, and it might be on the fly via API. So these are some of the new interfaces that actually we see more and more as clients coming to us say, it was used to be only email and web downloads. Now I have plenty of other incoming documents and content. I don't want to stop the business. I don't want to tell the business, choose some other path. I want to enable the business, and that's where we tell them, okay, so we can help you there.
It seems like that's one of the sort of the tricky parts in this is once you get it. I was thinking as you've been going through, I've been trying to think through not so much threat modeling what you're doing, but I've been thinking, okay, well, where are the weaknesses in this? But from the point of view of like, once you get your hand on a file, you guys are going to take good care of it. That's the sense I'm getting there. But like, okay, if hopefully, well, I'm sure someone's doing sneakernet, but there's so many different ways for a file to get into or out of a company nowadays, an organization. Or do you find yourself starting to either look at or integrate with other tools which sort of help with that sort of discovery process? Or imagine, example off the top of my head, someone gets a spreadsheet via iMessage and then copies it to their system. How do you guys make sure that something like that is safe?
So we're doing our best to cover all the business channels that the organization is aware of, and if you think about, for example, iMessage, at some point it will get to his phone. If he will be sharing that internally via one of the business applications, we'll get it. Okay. If you think about something that is getting into the network, at some point it will go through a lot of those business channels that we do protect. And if there's something that we do not protect, obviously we have the API. So at some point the organization need to be aware of the official channels and the shadow IT kind of channels. And we try to help them as much as we can to map those and connect Vetero as one solution to all those channels. But obviously, if someone would find a new way to get that document into the organization, of course, there's not a lot of things that we can do. Yeah.
Is that, and I'm just me off in my little corner of the world, is that a realistic concern that people are worrying about, or is that sort of me with the security hat on going a little bit further than where the average company is?
So yeah, obviously, I mean, we getting customers are saying, look, we're allowing our employees to use Slack. Yeah. Now they're joining communities that we have no control on. We have no idea, where they get the next document into their endpoint, or maybe sharing that in the employees kind of small group. And so we see a lot of new channels coming and in use like Slack. We used to see a lot of, they ask a lot for Box and Dropbox, but I think Slack is the one that we're hearing more often.
The idea too, kind of thinking from let's call it threat modeling, or what do sophisticated and successful attacks look like. Paul has mentioned interacting with PDFs. Fill out the form, fill out the W-9, because people do enjoy getting paid. But social engineering can also be, here is your pay stub, or here's instructions how to receive your pay. For your protection, this is a password-protected PDF, and here's the password for it. So, that's not something that I think you can necessarily automatically rewrite a password-protected PDF or other type of files, zip file, et cetera. So, what is that? How does that type of interaction affect your designs here in your thought processes?
So actually, that's a great question. One of the things that we saw that a lot of the bad guys, they're actually leveraging, that feature of password protecting documents, and that's a legit feature. And we see more and more actually legit documents being password protected, and practically those are encrypted document. So all those controls that we might have in place, they're just blind, right? They can do nothing with encrypted documents. And one of the things that we realize is that we can actually solve that as we know those file types and those formats, is when we detect a file that is encrypted with a password, we actually interact with the end users and telling, for example, that user, hey, there is a file waiting for you. If you know the password, type it here. Once you type in the document password, we're decrypting the file, we're doing all that magic, replicating and creating that safe copy, and of course delivering that to the user. And in fact, we enabled a lot of organizations to really start, securing inbound documents that were password protected. Some organizations, mostly in the financial industry, they had a policy that they're blocking all password protected documents. And it was just terrible because users were calling the help desk saying, hey, I really need to have that document. And that poor guy on the IT desk, he was saying, okay, have you expected that document? Yeah. And do you know the sender? Yeah, I know the sender. Okay, so I will release that for you. So eventually they lost security because they can do nothing with it. They couldn't even scan it with the traditional one technology, and they lost productivity because the person was waiting for that document, sometimes minutes, sometimes hours, sometimes days. So we lost, in those two fronts. So by leveraging Votura technology, we enable them to have that workflow. So it's just, a self-service. So the users just type in the password, they're getting the safe copy of the document and just opening those documents. And we saw some really, really cool attack that I can share with you about how actually the bad guy really built that. In fact, one of our customers, they were working with a law firm, and that law firm was hacked. Someone just stole credentials and just logged into their Office 365 mailbox. They were hijacking one of the threads between that law firm and that company, that insurance company, that they're one of our customers. But just hijacking that thread, you just hit reply and they read the thread and say, hey, here see the attached document, that's the draft of the contract. Because they were talking about getting a contract, right? So if you would ask that guy, do you know that person? Of course, that's a partner in that law office. I'm working with him for the last 10 years. Have you expected the document? Of course, I expected that document. That's a draft for a contract I was wishing to review. And in fact, that attachment was password protected. So no one could really do anything with that document. And luckily, we were able to provide them a clean document. So once the end user just opened that zip file, was specifically a zip file, was password protected, type in the password, opening the content, just double-clicking that Word document, it was safe. Nothing bad has happened. So I think this actually demonstrates a level of, sophisticated attack that was leveraging, social engineering, hijacking the partner, luring everyone in that chain to click, and of course, blinding all the security controls that the company had in place. So I think understanding the risk of those sophisticated attacks and leveraging all those small things is really, really important, because we saw, plenty of bad guys that replicating that exact techniques on the last year.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really cool about the approach you've taken, in the sense that we're just going to rewrite into a safe format. All the web applications out there with dealing with user-generated content, doing similar things on a much smaller scale, perhaps, or more narrow focus scale with images, for example, just rewriting into WebP, stripping metadata, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of what you're doing is make it safe, which you can make something already safe, make something malicious safe, but it's not necessarily a detective tool, or is it? What's the detection aspect here, where you're saying, we rewrote this for you, and by the way, we did protect you from X type of attack, this type of threat? Because I imagine that information, it would still be useful to an organization to know that they're being targeted, or there's other things that they may need to be worried about.
Yeah, that's right. I think a lot of organizations, especially small companies, they don't have a huge SOC team to really monitor and threat intel team to really, go after every alert in the organization. But they still want to know that they're being attacked. And CDR by nature is mostly preventive. So what we did is that we actually augmented our technology with detection technology that can do that retrospectively. So first, we're delivering safe documents all the time. It was always delivering safe content. Now, 3 days or 7 days after that document was actually delivered, we scanning the original with the traditional technology. Now, some portion of those malicious documents can be detected after a week or a couple of weeks. At that point, we're telling the customers, look, 2 weeks ago, you received a document. Don't worry, you were safe. But now we can tell you that it was actually a malicious sample. No one in the world knew that 2 weeks ago, but don't worry, you were safe. This is actually the type of malware that you were there. For example, Valerian Trojan that was in the example I gave just a few minutes ago. This is the type of Trojan. If you wanna dig into that, there are plenty of other threat intel tools that the SOC team or potentially the security researcher can go after. But we giving the customer first the understanding of what happened. But anyway, there is no rush because he was safe anyway. He doesn't need to really, remediate. He doesn't need to respond immediately. Just give him it's kind of alerts free, but giving you all the information you need in order to really have that security research.
Yes, it definitely must be a nicer feeling to have preventive and say, by the way, you are safe, rather than just pure detection after the fact that said, please go clean up because we did find something that happened here. I'm curious, Aviv, in all this work you've been doing the pen testing, you've been doing the researching, now Votiro doing this with file types. Do you have a favorite or a least favorite file type of your own?
So obviously PDF, this is one of the nastiest file types. But I think the one that actually amazed me, that was CAD, the AutoCAD file type. In fact, not a lot of people know, but actually AutoCAD, they have a macro feature, exactly as the Office documents. And, a lot of the architects and designers, they're not really, security savvy, right? So a lot of them can open those planning files, architecture design of something, and just bam, the macro can run and infect their computers. And I was amazed that such feature exists, and not a lot of people know about that. So of course we protect from that as well, but that this is actually one of the interesting and surprising features I realized.
Yeah, I love those surprises, especially they're a bit scary from a security perspective because we don't like surprises, perhaps. But that is fun. As we wrap up here, Aviv, anything what should users be looking forward to or be thinking about in the future? Can we still just continue to click on whatever link gets sent to us and open whatever file we want to read? So
obviously, I think that users should be aware of what they're clicking, but I think that the security architects and IT should look for preventive solutions and proactive solutions that enable the business. Votiro is one. There's others in the market in some other fields as well, in zero trust content security. And I believe that this is where the users and, of course, the IT managers should follow. We want to enable the business. We don't want to be the bad guys. And of course, if anyone wants to try Votiro, we offer a free trial on our website. But obviously, I would let each listener to test his own solution.
No, indeed. Well, we've been talking about malicious content, but Aviv, you've brought us wonderful, informative content on this topic. So I want to say thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome, Mike. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Aviv.
I want to thank John and Paul as well as to thank all of our listeners. To learn more about Votiro, visit securityweekly.com/Votiro. And by the way, make sure to read RFC 3514. With that, we'll take a quick break and return with news of the week.